Hello, so today I'm going to talk about Slate Trigger 2 and how to use it. Okay, it's been around for quite some time now, but there's some people that still need a little bit of guidance on there, or maybe you just need a bit of a refresher. Either way, check this one out. So today I'm not going to be looking at how to set it up because it can be different depending on which DAW you're using. I've already done another video on how to set it up in Logic and how to set it up in Pro Tools, so go and check those out if you haven't already. But what we're going to do is we're going to jump in already ready to go because there's loads to get through, so I'm trying to keep it as short as possible. So let's just go. Okay, so today we're going to be using it on a snare drum, but of course you can use it on any drum you like, really. As I said, everything should already be set up, but just so you know, I'm using Pro Tools. You can use anything you like. On my auxiliary, I'm using bus 1 and 2, and then I'm sending via pre-fader, I'm sending my snare to bus 1, because that's going to be going to the left side, and then my kick is going to bus 2, which is going to the right side of the plugin, which will only be relevant when we get to the noise suppression, which comes much, much later. So this is where we start. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go through sorting out all of these triggering settings, because they're going to be the most important thing to dial that in and just get things triggering as accurately as possible. There's quite a lot of settings in there, so it's good to really understand exactly what they're doing. We're going to do this before we do any actual triggering and actually hear any samples coming through. Okay, so we'll just have a look just at the snare for now. So we can have a little listen to that. It's going like this. And as you can see, it's already appearing there. So I'm just going to mute that channel so we can see what it's doing. And because I've got it in pre-fader mode, it's always going to be going. So always make sure you do that. Right, so as you can see, it's already picking up these hits. Okay, these are the snare hits that are coming through. So you've got a few different adjustments you can make. The main adjustment you're going to start with is a detail. So as you adjust this, you'll see the lines move, and that's going to be picking up more or less of the hits. So as you see, and the main thing to do before you get there is make sure that these main hits, the main hits that you're looking for, are reaching, you know, pretty much the top. So if it's not, it might be that you're getting a very weak signal, something like that. Then you can adjust this volume control, and you just want to bring that up until we're getting a nice healthy level. Okay, yep, we're liking that. That's really nice. So you can hear a bit of that. The other thing that we have on here is ReTrigger and sensitivity. So ReTrigger is the minimal interval between the hits. So it says in a user manual, it basically says it's how long it remains blind. So most of the time you don't have to adjust this too much because it really is quite a clever plugin. But you can use this to avoid things if it's getting some miss hits, if it's getting ones like which are just hits just afterwards a little bit too quickly, or you can like lower it to try and get some of the ones which it is actually missing. You want it to be in there, but where it's set already tends to be a pretty good place to start. Now with the sensitivity, this is how many of the hits it's going to be picking up or how much it kind of wants to ignore. So when you leave it at 50, that's about the default, and that's going to serve most cases. The time when you want to adjust that will mainly be actually with a snare drum when you want to really get some of the ghost notes. So I'm going to go back again, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down the detail just so we can really get those low ones, and I'm going to bring up the sensitivity just to make sure it's picking out everything. So as you can see, it's not quite getting all of those at the bottom there. So I'm going to adjust the sensitivity, and you'll see that they'll all start to pick it up. Okay, so now you can see it's getting much more in there. So then you're going to be getting more of the ghost notes. In this particular case, I'm not going to want all of those, so I'm going to leave it off, but we will report back to that in just a moment. The other thing that you have on here are the filters. Now, these are going to be really important. And in fact, I've done a whole video which is showing you the importance of that and how powerful that can be. So go and check that out if you haven't already. But in the meantime, what you want to do is you're going to set this to essentially where the main fundamental of the drum is going to be. So low cut, if it's a snare drum, we're not really going to have much below 100. You can probably crank that up just a little bit if you like. And then the higher cut, we want to cut everything which is above this frequency. So there's definitely nothing in 17,000 hertz. So we can even bring that down just so you're getting just the high end or even just a crack of the snare, because the main thing we want to do is we want to just try and hone this in so it's just triggering what we want it to trigger. Okay, so if you're on a kick drum, for example, you would leave this low cut all the way down because you want to get all that low end, and you can bring the high cut all the way as far as it can go to, yes, which is 400, because then that's going to be ignoring everything which is above it, which would usually be bleed like from the snare or even from the toms and stuff. So we're going to just bring that up just a little bit to get a bit more of the snare. Okay, next up is the gate control. Now, the gate is super useful. And what we're going to do is we're going to change this mix knob to 0%. Okay, so this is now, it's showing us what is coming into the plugin. So when it's on 100%, that's basically what's going out. Okay, so when it's on 0%, we're showing exactly what's coming into the plugin. So at this stage, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute everything and just have that trigger going. That's showing me what it's going to be triggering, okay, what it's going to be picking out. If you hit the gate, it's a really, really good gate. I mean, Slate do a really great drum gate already, so give that a go if you haven't already, but it's basically using the same kind of technology. Now, the actual sound of this gate only applies to the source material, so it's not going to be affecting the actual triggered sound. It's not going to be affecting the samples that come out of it. But the good thing about this is when you put the gate on, it's going to be gating everything that's not being triggered, and because we're on the 0% on the mix, so only listening to what's coming in, what's going to be triggered, you can really use this to fine tune what is going to be triggered afterwards. The other thing that affects the gate, or the main thing that affects the gate, are the triggering controls, the detail, the ReTrigger, and the sensitivity, and of course those filters as well. This is a really good way to narrow it down and hone in on exactly what you want to trigger. So now let's have it listen with the gate on. So now you can see that is exactly what it's going to be triggering. So now if we listen to that part which had a few more ghost notes in, we can start to really hone that in some more. So let's bring that down. Okay, details all the way down. Not getting those ghost notes. Bring up the sensitivity. And now you can really hear it's actually picking out exactly what it's going to be triggering. So now it's going to be far more accurate because you can hear exactly what it's doing. And now there's one more step which can hone it in just a little bit more. And that step is the suppress tool. Okay, so how we set things up earlier, as I mentioned before, we've got the snare coming into the left side, or bus 1 of 2, and then the kick was going into the right side, so bus 2 of 2. So in the same way that we've set it up before, so you've got pre-fader, and then let's just have a little listen to the kick and the snare. Okay, so you know what the kick drum is doing. Now what I'm going to do is this little knob here, the suppress knob, that is going to be taking whatever you're feeding into the right hand side, so in this case bus 2, whatever you're feeding into the right hand side, that's going to take it as an example of don't trigger me. Okay, so anytime it gets that hit, it's going to try to avoid that. So I'm going to bring it up and you're going to start to see some red waveforms, and those are the ones which are not being triggered. Okay, and then that's a kind of healthy amount you want to see there. You want to see the red lines going that little bit over the detail line, which is where you're setting the trigger. So you want to have that going over a little bit just to make sure it's definitely getting rid of anything you don't want to hear. And this doesn't have to be a kick drum. That's just the main one that you'd use. But what you can also do, and what I've done over here, for example, is I've set it up on the tom as well. Okay, so we've got a tom here. So that second tom, that is feeding into it. And what might sometimes happen when you've got a feel like that, especially when it's a tom that comes in such quick succession after the snare, it might want to try and pick up that tom. So now that that's being fed into it, let's have a little look. Yeah, so that one there. Here we go. That is that tom. So it's seeing that tom and it's saying, okay, don't listen to me either. So don't listen to the kick, don't listen to the tom. And then you can adjust how much of each is going in there, depending on the track, depending on the part and what you need to get rid of. Okay, I think it's time to actually bring in some samples now. I know there's taken a little bit of time to get to this point, but it's really important that you spend that time, because then it's going to be much more accurate and there's going to be less miss triggers as well. Okay, so let's bring in some samples. Let's go to our browser. Make sure you've set that up already. Like, check out my previous videos if you haven't already. And you can bring in anything you want. You can bring in any WAV file, and all you need to do is find the one you want. We could go with that one and then just bring it into one of the channels. Or you can use a TCI. So I'm going to be using some of those. They are ones which have been made by the instrument editor. So it's going to have multi-layers. So you're going to have multi-layers and multi-velocities. So we've got this type here. We've got the one which is in. So that's just going to be per channel. So you've got like a snare top, snare bottom, all that sort of thing. And then the one which has the PR, that means it's a preset. So it's going to be loaded preset of all of them together. So that's what we're going to use today. We're going to double click that and it's going to pre-populate it just like that. Okay, so we've got 2 snare tops, a bottom, overheads, and then a selection of rooms. This is one I actually made myself, which is available to buy. So check out in the description. I'll leave all the details in there. Let's have a quick listen firstly, just to see what it sounds like with the kit. And make sure now that you're going to change your mix knob to 100% because you want to be hearing all of those samples. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll play it with just the drums and I'll bring in the trigger just so you can hear what it's doing. Okay, beautiful. Now, the first thing you want to do with any samples that you bring in, this is super important, is check the phase. If it's out of phase, it's going to sound bad. That is just the end of that story. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to solo the snare, and we're going to go through and we're just going to play with this button here, the flip all phases, and we're just going to adjust it. We're just going to toggle it in and out just to see what sounds better. If it sounds thinner and not as good, it's going to be out of phase. If it sounds thicker and fuller and better, it's going to be in phase. Let's have a look. There we go. So we want it right there. And make sure you do that with any sample that you bring in, because just because one sample is out of phase to the other sample doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It just means that they were just, they had microphones in a different place. There's so many different things that could be affecting it, so just make sure everything is in phase, and you can adjust that on the individual channels as well. Okay, so whether it be the direct mics or the room mics, you can adjust that accordingly. Right, now the next point is to look at this view curves. Press that button and voila, all of these fun things you can play with, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. We're going to go through one by one. I'll go as quick as possible and just give an example of what they do. You can adjust individual channels if you like, just by doing so, or if you click at the end here, this will mean that when you adjust one, it's going to affect all of them. So that's what I'm going to do for now. And to start off with, I'm just going to show you the room mic, and what I'm going to do is it's just going to be just the trigger, okay? Because this is a good way to show you how it works. So if we go back and we're just going to solo the room mic. So attack, sustain, release, essentially just like your standard envelope. You've all used those, you understand how that works pretty much. So attack is how quickly it takes to get to the final volume. So if we just adjust that, you're going to hear it kind of just sort of fading in. Yeah, most of the time you'll have the tack just on 0 milliseconds, but you might want to adjust that according to what you're doing. Sustain, so how long it takes to stay at maximum level. Okay, let's try that. So you can hear just a little bit of a change there, but it's really release where you're really going to make the difference. And this is especially the case in room mics because they have the length. So let's adjust that. So this is the time it takes after the sustain to return to 0. So let's just brawl that down. We're going to do it with the sustain as well. Yeah, so you can get like quite a gated reverb there if that's what you want to do. In this case, we're just going to leave them where we are because they were absolutely fine. I didn't really need to make too much adjustments. Okay, let's go back to all of them, and we're going to look at these bottom ones. These ones I find I use that much more. So dynamics, basically it's how many dynamics you want in there. Do you want more or less dynamics of the overall sound? So if you leave it at 100, then that is as it's intended to be. And if you go all the way down to 0, it's going to start to bring up the softer hits. So even if it's playing, if you've set it up in whatever way you have, it's going to start to play some of the softer ones that little bit louder. Let's see if we can show you how that works. So this is how it normally sounds. So you can hear just a few different levels in there. Let's go all the way to 0. So if you notice there, when I had it all the way to 0, it was bringing up those softer notes and just basically lowering or decreasing the dynamic range. So there's not as much difference between the soft notes and the loud notes. Okay, next up we go to velocity. So this is about the response of the instrument itself. So if you're starting just on default, then that's at 50. But if you increase it, so it goes between 0 and 100, like all of these other ones do, or other dynamics and velocity does. If you increase it, it means it's going to be choosing more of the louder hits. Even if you're hitting a softer hit, it's going to choose more of the louder ones. So let's just listen to that. Okay, you heard that's quite different, I'd say. And then if you go all the way down to 0, it's going to do the opposite. So it's going to be playing more of the softer notes, even if you're playing loud notes. So it's even just missing some out there because it's not really sure what to do. So if you had, for example, if you had velocity all the way to 100 and you had dynamics all the way to 0, so we're saying no dynamics, I don't want any dynamics at all. And velocity, I want you to play all of the loudest notes wherever possible. That's what I want. Then you're going to get a very rigid, like MIDI 127 kind of thing all the way through. Let's have a listen to that. Okay, so you get the idea. I mean, that can be very good if you literally just want it to be just doing bang on all the time, no dynamics, nothing in between. And then lastly, we've got the range minimum and maximum. So this one is actually limiting the velocities. So for example, if you've got something like a TCI like this, where you do have multiple different velocity layers, and you don't want it to be playing the top end of the range, like with my one that I've created here, the very top end, it's going to be hitting rim shots. You might not want any rim shots. So in that's the case, then you adjust the range on the max, and it will mean that it's not going to play those samples which are up there. It's not going to be play the samples which are above 90, as I've just changed here. And the same for minimum. You can adjust that. So you say, I don't want you to play any of those really low notes or those soft ones. I don't want any of the ghost notes because I don't like what they sound like. So you can just adjust it to just get exactly the samples or the right part of the sample file that you want. So now that's quite consistent. Now I'm it's just hitting a small amount of the range. It's only hitting there's like 7 velocity layers in there, but I'm only using about two or three of them or something. So it's going to sound very, very similar. And that might be what you want. It might not be what you want, but if it is, then there you go. And it does mean that, for example, I can now limit the range, put up the velocity, take away all the dynamics. And that's practically playing the same sample all the time. I mean, it's going to be playing a round robin because there's about 7 round robins in there, but it's playing that same velocity layer and it's not deviating from anything. One last little point on here, just reset all these values to their default. If you just hold Option and click any of them, it's going to reset them exactly to where they were. Also, if you go back to the view mixer, you've got this little one which was actually just brought in the most recent update of Slate Trigger. So it won't appear if you've got a slightly older version. So go and update if you haven't, because it's definitely worth doing so. Link tune just means that all the tunings of these you can adjust. So I can adjust the tuning to match a snare drum. If I've got a higher snare drum which I want to try and sound exactly the same as a sample that I'm bringing in, you can try and adjust that. Before you could only do that individually. Now with link link tune that's usually engaged by default to be on, it's going to change the tuning of all of them at one time. Really good if you've got a preset like I do, because I'm using the same snare, that it's the same samples. I want them to all go up or down together. But if you don't want them to do that, then unengage that and it's just going to do one at a time. Okay, beautiful. Last but by no means least is the MIDI capabilities that you can do with this. So the first thing you want to do is go to settings, and then you've got your MIDI in and MIDI out, and you want to set the note in which you want to do. So what we're going to do here is we're going to be capturing the MIDI. So we're looking at a snare drum. Snare drums often in a general MIDI setup or layout will be a D1. So what I'm going to do is I'll set that to correspond with that. I've already done that here, but you can choose whichever note you want that to be. So the MIDI out is going to be, when we're capturing this MIDI, which note would you like me to capture it onto? Since we're doing a snare, let's set them both. So we're going to do D1 for that. We want it to be a D1. And then the MIDI in is when a MIDI channel is playing back something and you want that to go in, be fed into trigger, it's asking which note am I looking for. So in this case, we want that to also be a D1. So we're getting them both to D1. And now what you'll do is you'll play your whole track. And this is once you've done all of your triggering and you're happy with what it is, and you're happy with everything that it's doing, and you want to get the MIDI, then you just go from the beginning, you hit play, and then you just leave it to go to the end to do its thing. Okay, once it's done that, you're going to have something here in the bottom left, which under where it says MIDI capture, it's going to say drag on track. So let's create a MIDI channel. There we go. I'm going to call that snare. And now we can drag this MIDI capture onto the track. Make sure you bring it right back to the beginning, because it's going to be taking the MIDI notes from the start, from the very start of the song. And now if we just have a quick look at that, we will see we have all of those MIDI notes. There we go. So there's lots of flams in there. That's what was going on. Got all those MIDI notes, and you'll also notice it has arrived at a D1, which is what we set up in the plugin. What we can do here is we can disable the buses that we got that were actually being sent into it, because now we're going to be triggering that from the MIDI instead. Okay, so if I just play it back, currently just going to listen to the trigger. Yep, I'm not hearing anything. I'm metering there. I'm getting a MIDI click. Yeah, but I'm not hearing anything. It's not getting to the actual plugin itself. So you need to send that into the plugin. So go from the output of your MIDI channel, and then it should appear. Here we go. Snare trigger, trigger 2, channel 1. I tend to always do channel 1, but that's something you can also set up in the plugin. So just to confirm that, in settings, I've got that set to channel 1, as you can see. Oops. But you could also just leave it on any if you like, but I'll leave it on channel 1 anyway. So now that should be playing back. Okay, so now that's playing back the MIDI. Now, as far as most DAWs go, you can just use an auxiliary channel and that will work absolutely fine. And you can do that in Pro Tools as well. However, it is suggested, and it can sometimes be the better way to do it, especially if you're using this along with other virtual instruments like SSD5, for example, is that the best way to do it in Pro Tools is to actually insert it onto an instrument channel. Okay, so insert it onto an instrument channel and then do the same what we just did here, but we're going to be sending that into the instrument version of Trigger. That can just tend to be a little bit more accurate. Not always an issue when you're using real audio from real kit, but like I say, it can definitely be more of an issue and much more accurate if you're using software instruments. So bear that in mind if you're using Pro Tools. And now what that basically means is we could use SSD or Superior Drummer or Get Good Drums, whatever you're using. You can use that in conjunction with Trigger, and you can set everything up in the same way that you would do in Trigger. You can still use all of the curves like we were doing before. You can still use all of those, and you can bring in all of those other samples that you're already going to be using, but you can just use it from a MIDI point of view coming from a software instrument. And that brings me to the end. I think I covered pretty much everything, but do let me know if I did miss anything out. By the way, if you did like the sound of that drum that I was using there, that was a TCI that I created myself. It is available now. I recorded it with 9 mics through Neve and API preamp, so it sounds really good in a large live room with a professional drummer. So if you fancy that, you can get it from my website, jamesarter.com. There's a direct link in the description below. I often do discounts on it, so it's worth having a check and signing up to to the mailing list. Also, you'll get free stuff if you do that as well. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you've got any questions, hit me up in the comments below and I'll get back to you and I'll try and help the best I can. All right, see you next time. Bye for now.